I'll just share a little bit of my personal story as hopefully evidence of the need for all of you to do the work you're doing in supporting what we're doing here. I grew up as a child of two parents who met when they were graduate students at Berkeley and were actively involved in the civil rights movement. And so, you know, they were marching all the time, and I was marching too in a stroller, but I was marching nonetheless, where everyone around me was fighting and talking about justice. And so, frankly, at a very young age, I decided, well, you know, my heroes, and the heroes for me growing up, were the architects of the civil rights movement. They were the lawyers who used the skill that they had and had acquired in law school to know that we had to fight for what were the true and should be always the true values of our country. And they used the tool of the law to remind the world through the United States Supreme Court of what justice really looks like. And those heroes were, of course, Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston and Constance Baker Motley. So I decided I wanted to be a lawyer. And then I went to Howard for undergrad, and I went to Hastings for law school, and then I made a decision. I wanted to be a prosecutor. And you can imagine going to my family and extended family and having that discussion was quite an experience, and it was kind of like defending one's thesis before a professor when you talked with my family about why you wanted to be a prosecutor. But my feeling then, and it has been proven to me throughout my career, is that when we look at the criminal justice system, it has and has had such a profound impact on our most vulnerable communities. It has had and continues to have such a profound impact, in particular, on the African American and Latino communities in this country and on economically poor communities, both in terms of who have, through cycles, become perpetrators as well as who are the victims. And I felt very strongly that having come from the background and the experience that I had as a child growing up in an African American community, that I wanted to be able to have the power of the prosecutor to be the voice about what justice should look like and what justice would look like if it were to be relevant to certain communities. And then I decided to run for district attorney of San Francisco, and in so doing, I decided to challenge the incumbent. And he had been in office for 8 years, 2 terms, and he came from an old political family. So when I decided to run for district attorney of San Francisco, you can imagine that the feedback I got was pretty much, well, why would you want to put yourself through that? In particular, I should let you know that the incumbent had the nickname KO because he was a boxer. And they said, well, why don't you wait your time? Or, you know, maybe people aren't ready for you to be DA, and, you know, why, again, would you want to just go through that? And I said, well, because I think it's important that we run a DA's office in a way that's relevant to the community that's impacted. So I got my first poll results early on. And I was sitting in this little conference room, and I was ready, and I was hopeful. I was Barack, I was really hopeful. And I like Jesse, I was keeping hope alive, right? And then the piece of paper was handed to me. And I was at 6 points in the polls. So you can imagine I felt really small, very small. But nonetheless, you know, kind of feeling, you know, Barack has said it so well, feeling the audacity of hope and all of that, walked out of the room and walked out of there and called up a bunch of friends, and we said, well, we're going to do this anyway. And the way that we were successful in this campaign is the way that this organization and all of you and all of us will be successful as we walk out of here. What we did is we recognized the importance of diversity. We recognized the importance of making sure that the voiceless among us had a voice in government. And what we did is what my parents did in the civil rights movement, which is we put together a coalition. And it was a broad coalition, and it connected communities that seemingly had nothing in common and had certainly been disconnected for quite some time. And in putting that coalition together, having the support to believe we could do something that had not been done before. That was both financial, because by the way, I had to raise a whole lot of money. When we put that coalition together, we did the work of winning an election that people thought could not be won, and I did then become the first woman elected district attorney in San Francisco and the first African American woman elected in the state of California as DNC. But truly, when we have now gone forward, and I've just started my second term, I ran unopposed this last election, but I started my second term in January. What we have been able to do with that office is talk with elected DAs throughout California and throughout the country about why we need to be smart on crime, okay? So we have been talking with prosecutors and communities throughout the country about the need to recognize the connection, for example, between public education and public safety. We've been talking about why a chief law enforcement officer of a major city in this country is concerning herself with the fact that we have high truancy rates among African American and Latino children, and that, by the way, there's no coincidence between those numbers and who ends up in our county jails. We've been talking about why a community should put its resources into thinking about and prioritizing what is happening with youth in our community that are living in high violence communities and are experiencing post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of the bullets and the gunfire that they hear every night, and why that is relevant to their behavior in the classroom the next day and 4 and 5 years hence when they're slinging drugs on the corner. And why we should therefore think about public safety in the context not only of, and I've done a lot of this, Steve Phillips, locking up folks who need to be locked up, but also thinking about public safety in the context of being smart around meaningful prevention and resources put into prevention of crime in the first place, not as the thing that social workers and teachers do, but as the things that law enforcement should concern itself with. I could not do this work, and we cannot replicate this work without having the support of folks like you supporting candidates like me, so I want to thank you. Thank you.